Hi everyone, welcome back to Visually Hidden Selects. I'm Peter O'Brien, and today I'd like to talk to you about The Princess Bride from 1987, directed by Rob Reiner and starring Cary Elwes, Chris Sarandon, Mandy Patinkin, Wallace Shawn, André the Giant, Christopher Guest, and Wright in her first film role as The Princess Bride. This film is based on a book of the same name written by William Goldman and first published in 1973. William Goldman was already a very successful screenwriter, and he immediately set about adapting this novel for a film. And although he had the draft ready in 1974, the process of going from script to screen took over a decade due to various administrative changes and false promises from studio executives. He ultimately wound up buying the story rights back from the studio in order to protect his work until an actual deal for the film could be made. During the 1980s, there was a surge of medieval fantasy films like Ladyhawke, Legend, The Neverending Story, Willow, and The Princess Bride is right in there with them, but I feel like this film has a little bit more of a universal appeal, and a big part of that is because of the humor that's infused into it. And that was a big part of what William Goldman was trying to achieve with the novel that was then transferred into the script and ultimately brought to the screen at the hands and eyes of the director, Rob Reiner. This was his fourth film as a director. He had already done This Is Spinal Tap and had just finished filming The Sure Thing when he secured the rights to The Princess Bride. And those two films really encompass all of the elements needed to tell this particular story, because This Is Spinal Tap is a satire and a comedy, and The Sure Thing is a romantic comedy. So this film was right up Reiner's alley in terms of the narrative and displaying his strengths as a filmmaker. When it comes to the basic premise of this film, it's really easy to think of it as just another fantasy fairy tale, but it's actually a lot more than that, because it's the telling of a fairy tale and all of the thematic elements that are involved in that particular genre. The film begins with a young boy sick in bed who gets a visit from his grandfather. And of all the things that his grandfather could bring him to cheer him up, he brings a book. But as the grandfather quickly points out, it's a very special book. And he sells it right away and makes good on everything he tells his grandson. Within the first 3 minutes of the movie, the story is up and running, full speed ahead, and throughout the film, the grandson becomes so emotionally invested in the story, he's captivated by the words on the page. So, the film is actually the boy's interpretation of this story. This film had a budget of about $16 million, which is fairly low for an ambitious period piece. The way to really make that work on screen is to go where the history is. So this film was shot entirely in England, except for parts of the Cliffs of Insanity, which were the Cliffs of Moher in Ireland. But the castle is a real castle, Haddon Hall, which was built around 1086, so approximately 900 years before this film was made. One of the principal locations was being constructed. They did add some turrets and a portcullis to the castle to just make it a little bit more grandiose, and they actually wound up leaving them after filming completed because it made the castle look better. And I really think it's these tangible locations that just help sell the fantasy elements of the story. For example, when they're filming on sound stages, your mind has already accepted the practicality of the real locations, so it works really well with creating a cohesive fantasy setting. And the production design does a great job of riding that line between all of these theatrical, practical, comedic, dramatic, horrific, and historic elements. This film boasts an incredible cast of basically character actors. I mean, there really is no star in this film. Even the leads, Cary Elwes and Wright, they were not stars at the time of filming. And one of the things that I find fascinating about this particular cast is that none of them are British, but they all speak with these flawless British accents. Except of course for Indigo, the Spaniard, who speaks with a Spanish accent, and Fezzik, who speaks with a French accent. Really, the only person using their own voice in this film is Wallace Shawn, who plays Vicini, the Sicilian. I don't know if he couldn't do an accent or if they just felt that his natural voice added to the comedy of the piece, but whatever reason, he's so good, you don't miss it. I love the trio of bad guys, especially when they're first introduced and you see them standing in height order. It's such a great visual introduction, and I love how quickly you get to understand their relationships and their group dynamic. It again comes back to the writing. Fezzik is probably my favorite character in the film, and I don't know if it's because it's André the Giant or because it's André the Giant playing a character or what, but I love his integrity. Even when he's, quote, a bad guy, there's an inherent innocence about him that comes through in his actions and delivery, where it becomes clear that he's really more of a misfit who's just trying to find his place in the world. But my favorite performance in the film is hands down Christopher Guest as Count Rugen. He co-wrote and starred in This Is Spinal Tap as Nigel Tufnell, the lead guitarist, and here he is playing a villainous medieval count, which, if that isn't range, I don't know what is. He's primarily known for comedy, having written and directed and starred in films like Waiting for Guffman and Best in Show, but here he's playing it stone cold serious and introducing a real element of terror to the film and story. He does have some funny exchanges, but with a very dry delivery, and he never breaks. He's 100% invested in his character and serves as a real anchor for the integrity of this story. And Chris Sarandon as Prince Humperdinck, he is such a handsome man, and he is so perfectly cast as this pretentious, pompous prince. But he also has this villainous edge, and you can see it in his previous film, Fright Night. I'm sure a big part of it just comes from his theater background and his training as an actor, but again, he's a character actor. He's not a huge star, but whenever he pops up in something, you always pay attention and you always remember the character. Of course, I'd be committing a great injustice if I did not mention the scene-stealing performance by Billy Crystal as Miracle Max, accompanied by Carol Kane as his wife Valerie. His improvisations throughout his little sequence are hilarious, and the character himself just adds a very fun fantasy element to this story that is already, by the time he enters, neck deep in that world. But he just takes it to another level both comedically and narratively that gets the characters across the finish line in the third act. One of the best things about this cast being an ensemble is that there really is a character for everyone. But the real heart of this film is the depiction of true love through the characters of Wesley and Buttercup, played by Cary Elwes and Wright. Their on-screen chemistry is captivating, and while their romance drives the story, and the concept of true love comes up several times, it never feels forced because, again, it's so believable. And that all falls on their shoulders as the leads in this story. I think another thing that keeps this film accessible to audiences and timeless is that it doesn't deal with extravagant creatures or effects that could otherwise date it. The core of this story really relies on the idea of true love, which is a universal desire. And when you surround it with fencing, fighting, torture, revenge, chases, escapes, what more could you ask for in a film? So that's it for The Princess Bride. I really hope you like this recommendation, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any future recommendations. If you do check out The Princess Bride, please leave us a comment and let us know what you think of the film. We will be discussing it at length on the next Visually Hidden Selects podcast, so be sure to tune into that. And until next time, see ya!